Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Offit Kurman's Remote Rundown. I'm Jim Reese, Director of Business Development at Offit Kurman, and each week I'm joined with labor and employment attorneys Russell Berger, Sarah Sawyer, and Veronica Yu for a conversation about the latest and most relevant issues related to COVID-19 and advice for owners and employers on how to best deal with these issues. Lots of changes since we spoke last week. The governor of Maryland laid out some new stuff for us to talk about on Wednesday that goes into effect today at 5 p.m. So why don't we kick it off? Russell, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So one of the things that employers are going to need to be conscious of in Governor Hogan's recent order is that effective 5 p.m. on July 31st, face covering, so masks, or something greater than what the executive order defines as masks, are required when engaged in work and interaction with others is likely. So that's a pretty vague term in the order, but the order goes on to say that includes in shared areas of commercial offices. So, for example, all of us are familiar with what it's like to be working in a law office. So maybe if in your own private office, you've got the door shut, interaction with others isn't likely. But if you're out in the common areas, you're in a conference room, you're in the hallways, interaction with others is likely or is more likely. So those are probably places where you'd be required to wear a mask. But it might not be limited to that, because you can think about it just in terms of open workspaces, whether it's cubicles or different workstations and people passing by in the hallways or people coming up to one another to discuss something. I mean, those are interactions with others as I think it's defined in the order.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, it's kind of a business specific evaluation that you have to conduct to figure out where is interaction likely and how can we comply with this order, which is mandatory and based on the order carries, criminal penalties and fines. So I think it's important to, update your policies if you've had them where maybe face coverings were a recommendation. Now you got to make sure they're required. And even without the enforcement aspect of it, you want to make sure you're complying so that your employees feel safe and you reduce any complaints that they may have either internally or to, third-party entities like OSHA. So compliance here is very important.
Hey, Sarah, before you jump in, my understanding is the language that was used, that Governor Hogan used, was that wearing masks for 5 years old and older in public places. Before you start, Sarah, would you include what public places includes, or what is not considered a public place?
Yeah, so the public place aspect, a lot of that, some of it hasn't changed in the fact that we're talking about places where people can't keep social distance or are around people that aren't members of their family, definitely enclosed spaces, where there's other people outside of your family. So it's, some of that, especially where people can't keep distance and things, is still the case, and it's just now becoming a more stringent standard. But it's also, I'm seeing very much from a practical standpoint, in addition to just making sure that you're complying with the letter of the law and these exact details, is also just as Veronica was mentioning, the comfort level of people and how that's adapting. So it's both making sure that you're aware of the definitions and the circumstances. And as Russell was mentioning, there's these very specific circumstances for office spaces, but just also I'm seeing when I'm going through policies with my clients, because now we're going, policies that I put in place for clients a couple of months ago, we're going back through, we're making additions, we're making changes. And a lot of it needs to be adjusted from a compliance standpoint, but it's also, well, are your clients in an office space comfortable even coming in at this point? And do you need to start readjusting the expectations, what your staff is doing as far as internal and external meetings? So a lot of my clients will have two different types of policies. One, or they're put together, but two different sections, let's say. where there's kind of the internal common area discussion, which we're having as far as people and, walking around the hallways, or if there's cubicles near each other and those types of things. But then also, policies on meetings with external people, visitors, clients. I know some businesses that have been having their clients start to come in wearing masks, having meetings and things, but especially people with older clients. I've got a client that has an older client base that really they struggle to wear masks, especially when it's 95 degrees outside. So those are all things, just even from a practical standpoint, that in addition to a compliance and figuring out what these definitions are and what these mean, how you're going to adjust your policies and your practices now that we are where we are.
Yeah, and we should mention there's a number of exceptions that could apply, for health reasons. I think I saw in the order, gyms, for example, are covered in the places that you're required to wear face coverings, but I think there's an exception for when you're engaged in strenuous activity at the gym. So I'm not sure, like if you're doing interval training on the treadmill, you have to put it on for the rest of the recovery period and take
How
it
much
off
are
when
you
you're,
sweating? Is that the test?
Yeah. Well, that's very specific to the individual then. But I mean, it's things like, public transportation, just being in any kind of public place, being outdoors where you can't social distance, anything that's healthcare related, and then the work requirement, which is in addition to places where interactions with others is likely. It also includes food prep and packaging. So, it doesn't change a ton. The thing that I think is the biggest change is with respect to workplaces. So, like we've been saying, and like Sarah just mentioned with the practical aspects of it, is you got to fit, and Veronica made this point too, it's specific to your workplace. You got to figure out where those interactions are likely, and you have to tell your employees you have to wear masks in these situations, in these areas. And that's got to be your policy now in the state of Maryland.
Hey guys, how about we take a couple minutes and talk about the governor's travel recommendations to deal with your employees who are traveling out of state to maybe some of the hot states.
Yeah, so that there was a press conference that Governor Hogan came out this week, and the face covering as well as the travel advisory was discussed. And there's a general recommendation, strong recommendation, that Marylanders refrain from non-essential travel outside of the state. And then on top of that, if you do travel out of the state to a state with a positivity test rate higher than 10%, which I believe is a different standard than what the tri-state area is using. So you want to, make sure you understand those nuances. But that person has to either get tested and quarantine until they get the results, or quarantine for 14 days. And he did exempt DC and Virginia from that recommendation, but there are currently 9 high-risk states that kind of fall into that area. Florida is a big one. A lot of people travel there, but it's a lot of southern states. And that's a moving target. Like, as different states have spikes, like we're going to see more states added to that list. So yeah, but it's important to know that this is a recommendation as opposed to the order, like the face coverings.
Yeah, and that really leaves you as an employer with a lot of discretion. So while this is strongly recommended by the state of Maryland, you don't have to do it. But that really then, in some ways, it makes it a harder decision for employers, because now the question is, should you do it? And, certainly it's easy for us as the lawyers to say, yeah, you should probably do it. We've been telling you for 20 weeks now to follow the CDC's guidelines, and those aren't required, but those are best practices. Those are, following those are things to make you reasonable. And so, it's very, like I said, very easy for us as lawyers to say, yeah, you should put this policy in place and just say, hey, we're going to follow this recommendation. It makes sense. And so, if you followed our prior advice and you already have an office access request form, that's something that can be modified to catch these issues on the way in. But, I think we certainly acknowledge that that's easier said than done. And you got to figure out how to actually make that work for your business.
I've gotten questions also around kind of 2 different types of travel as well. There's the personal travel, and then there's the work-related travel. So some companies had started to expand, allowing some work-related travel, meeting outside meeting outside of the office with clients, or traveling, interstate travel. For some businesses, that's a really common occurrence. So I think that, stopping that process and stopping the business travel or any work-related travel where you can, that's a little bit of an easier decision than trying to obviously motivate and enforce employees' personal travel, which often makes business owners feel real icky in my experience. And even though they know that that's, what's at stake here and what the issues are, that, makes them, that doesn't feel great. And it's not something that business owners really like to be in the business of doing, but the business travel at the very least is something that's a little bit of an easier decision to make in those circumstances.
And I would just add that on Monday, the mayor for DC also instituted a travel order. So I think these are going to be things that are coming up. We're going to see a lot more of them, and just being aware and understanding how that's going to impact your business is really important.
Yeah, it's really going to be a pain if you have employees in a couple different states, because I mean, even if we talk about like the DMV, DC's has its own rules. It has its own travel rules. Maryland's got something different. Virginia's now got their workplace safety standards that are going to be in place. So just in kind of our local area, you can have all these different regulations and different rules that you're going to have to follow. So again, it's just puts the burden on you as the employer to try to stay up to date with all these different things, and really take the time to plan for it.
And if you need any motivation to do that, there are some states, Connecticut recently just put into effect a rebuttable presumption for a time period from March to May, that if employees went into work and then they ended up having COVID-19, that there's a rebuttable presumption that they got it at work. So, that kind of takes me to my main takeaway today, which really is, as icky as some of this stuff feels, as difficult and complicated as it is, and as much as we all are exhausted by it personally and professionally at this point, the importance of staying on top of these things is really, we can't say it enough, just because in that particular instance in Connecticut, that's, if you didn't take care of business back in March through May, I mean, you're in a tough spot now, because you can't go back to your May self and say like, oh, well, maybe I should make sure that people are working remote right now, or, whatever it may have been, or I should have taken more precautions, or I should have listened to what the CDC guidance said, or whatever the circumstances. So, it's just more and more evident how important these things are to do.
Yeah, it kind of blows my mind a little bit that what Connecticut put in place goes backwards in time. That feels kind of fundamentally unfair. But that being said, I echo your point, Sarah, that this is really if you haven't done it already, you should start now. I mean, COVID isn't going away anytime soon. We're going to be dealing with it for a while. States are coming out with new regulations. More is happening. We're not, the threat might have gone down a little bit, but we're still living with it. So these are going to be longer term regulations. So you can't just kind of turn your head and get through a couple months and then everything's back to normal. So, as I said before, stay with it, stay on top of things, and do what you can to build out policies that work for your business.
Yeah, and my takeaway for today, and I'll give you a quick anecdote, but it would be to make sure you're pulling the actual order and reading the actual order instead of just relying on a news article. And my story would be, I missed Hogan's press conference this week, and so I just started Googling, what happened during the press release, and you get very generic, there was a mask mandate put into place, and there's a travel restriction, and it's very generalized. And then when I actually pulled up the order to read it, it really filled in a lot of the blanks, while there's still some gray areas. But by actually reading the order, you'll learn a lot more about what it says. And if there's too much legalese or you get confused, like, you can always call us to help walk you through that. But you'll just learn a lot more than just relying on a simple article.
I'm impressed that you read the order, and now I feel like I need to do it too.
Do it, Jim.
All right, well, that brings us to our trivia question. I've got a fun one today, and we'll start with Veronica since you're on a roll there. Who is your favorite celebrity and why? So this could be a sports figure, this could be an actor or actress, this could be, but probably won't be, a politician, somebody in your life, but your favorite celebrity and why?
Oh my gosh, I'm completely blanking. I will say right now, my favorite celebrity for all the drama is Kanye West and Kim Kardashian drama. That has consumed me this past week, so I will say that.
That and reading the governor's press conference, that's like the yin and the yang.
It's been a great week. It's been a great
Sarah.
My favorite would be Sarah Blakely, actually. I follow her on Instagram. She's the founder of Spanx. I just love her. I love her Instagram. It's really authentic, and she's a little crazy. Her and her husband are always up to crazy antics and things, but I like that she's a perfect combination of entertaining, but also someone that can really bring some value sometimes, which I appreciate. And I think she got a long way being herself, and it's a good reminder. So I really like her a lot.
So for Russell, ladies, should we eliminate the sports figure and just go with like anything but a sports figure?
Yes.
That really wouldn't be fair, but go ahead, Russell.
No, that's fine. That's fine. There haven't been too many sports to watch until like the last week anyway. And by the way, Sarah Blakely was on a podcast I listened to called How I Built It. And it talks about, and so she gives an interview about how she built her business, how she got the idea, how she kind of started from nothing and built her business, which is a fantastic podcast in general, but I think you should check out that episode.
I will.
And so kind of sticking with the podcast theme, because that's kind of all I've been able to consume recently. And it's kind of funny. I've become a big fan of Dax Shepard. And, you might remember him from Punk'd. And I thought, so you think it's kind of like this juvenile humor, but he's got a podcast called Armchair Expert. And, he's really a deep guy and has some fascinating points and some awesome guests on. So that's kind of been my thing to get me through the quarantine. Although I would add that my favorite local Baltimore celebrity is Offit Kurman Business Development head Jim Reese. Because I have not met anyone professionally in Baltimore who doesn't know Jim Reese.
Well, that's really nice. And I usually don't participate in this, but I'm going to because I've been asked this question a lot. And I love racket sports. At this point in my life, I'm down to playing tennis. That's about what I can do. And John McEnroe has always been a favorite personality of mine because that guy has attitude and he's great. He was a great player in the day. He had attitude in the day, and now he's does tennis commentary, and I think he's awesome. He and his brother do a lot of it together, but McEnroe is one of my favorites for sure.
Quick sneaking in Adam Jones then.
Yeah. Adam Jones. Okay. All right. Well, that wraps it up for this week's edition of Remote Rundown. We changed it to Friday rather than Thursday, so see if we could trick some people. But thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.